Among countless notable achievements in exploration, 5 firsts achieved by our members define the legacy of the Explorers Club. 1909, the North Pole. 1911, the South Pole. 1953, the highest point on Earth, summiting Mount Everest. 1960, the lowest point on Earth, the Marianas Trench. 1969, the surface of the Moon, the Apollo 11 mission.
The club's founding mission, to promote exploration by all means possible, remains our driving force. Headquartered in New York City with a community of chapters around the world, the Explorers Club supports scientific expeditions of all disciplines and unites our members in the bonds of good fellowship. Historic flags are carried on our most distinguished expeditions. Our members are storytellers and changemakers. We are driven by the instinct to explore, forge new frontiers, and push boundaries for the scientific advancement of human knowledge. We are explorers. Together, Fjällräven and the Explorers Club inspire the world to walk with nature. Join us each month for a thought-provoking and exciting new episode featuring explorers from around the world as they share their work and stories from the field. Our goal is to push the boundaries of curiosity, explore the wild around us, and inspire new and seasoned explorers to discover nature in a new way. The sense of togetherness with nature has never been more crucial. This is the Explorers Club Fjällräven Speaker Series.
The documented declines in bees and the extinction of some of the bees really ignited this desire in me to start working on bees in our country. And there was not much information or literature on bees and the species that we have, the populations, their current status, which was a serious cause for concern for me, especially considering that they're important for food security. As a result, I decided to take this journey to do exploration on bees.
Spending 6 weeks in Madagascar in 2014 really set me on my course. I know when I was there, I was experiencing new sights and sounds and seeing creatures I had only dreamed of seeing since childhood. So being there physically and witnessing the wilderness I had always dreamed of and seeing conservation issues on the front line, I knew that I would dedicate my life to protecting and understanding wild places like those.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trevor Wallace. I am the Vice President of Research and Education at the Explorers Club, and it is my great pleasure to be hosting this Fjällräven Explorers Club Speaker Series. And part of my responsibilities is overseeing our grant programs, and we have several. But one of the ones that is near and dear to my heart is the Fjällräven Grant Program. It's a small group of grantees, but they are incredible. They represent our club so well. They represent our mission so well. And it is a recent grant program. So we have 2 alumni from last year and 2 going out into the field this year, hopefully, who have been adapting their expeditions in these challenging times that we have. But last year, fortunately, we had Gugulethu, Tarakini, and my Fahmy doing research, Gugulethu, in Nzimba district in Zimbabwe, mapping and modeling bee species diversity and distribution. And my in Madagascar, looking at leech diversity and working in a newly discovered forest fragment, using these methods to understand the biodiversity of these amazing ecosystems that we're just beginning to understand. I would love to hear from both of you a little bit more. I just gave a very, very basic overview of what you do, but you both work in such incredible places and doing such important work. So why don't we start with you, Gugulethu? Can you give us an idea? What was your expedition that you did with this grant? And then what is the environment that you're working in?
Thank you so much, Trevor. My expedition mainly was about sampling bees in different land use systems so that we come to understand how the different land use systems have affected bee diversity, abundance, and how they're distributed. So our study area was in agroecological or agroecosystem. We had people's landscapes, homesteads. We had natural areas. We had grazing areas, and we also had fields. And in these different places, we managed to characterize first the environment so that we were able to relate that to bees and their habitats. So after characterizing our environment, we then went to sample the bees in a different environment. And we then, after that, tried to make an identification of the different species that we found there and their numbers. And then we were then able to try and understand how, who is affecting who and how they are affecting or relating.
Thanks so much, Gugulethu. Yeah, could you tell us a little bit about your expedition, your research, and what you've been working on?
As you said, I do look at leech diversity, the diversity of leeches themselves, but my research is also concerned with using leeches as tools to monitor vertebrate diversity. So in addition to identifying leech species, I'm also using the blood in their guts to identify their hosts. And so this gives me a really good snapshot of the biodiversity of the ecosystem as a whole. And this method has sort of grown in importance as more and more scientists move towards non-invasive sampling, and particularly in the region that I'm working in Madagascar, where few have been before, and we were actually the second scientific expedition out to this forest back in November when we were out there. So with the work that I'm doing with the leeches and this novel environment that we've come across, it's really important to establish sort of a baseline for species diversity in order to be able to protect this new fragment. And of course, it's new to science. Obviously, it's been around for quite some time, and the Malagasy are well aware of it. But it's just a really exciting time to be a scientist in Madagascar, where you can still sort of stumble upon untouched spaces to science. And so with that, the forest was quite isolated. It took us, I would say, about 5 days to get out to my study site, a 12-hour car ride down from the capital. We had to camp in a village before we started our hike up the mountain. And we eventually got there basically 5 days after I landed in the country. And all along the hike, this uphill hike, you're hiking through burnt ground. It really looks like the surface of Mars. You know, for 3 hours, it looks like there's no way you're ever going to come across any sort of life. And then all of a sudden, as you near the top, you hear the forest before you see it. And as you're standing over the edge, you hear the birds start to call from fragment to fragment, and you sort of make your final steps up this incline, and then you finally see all of this green, and it's truly the last thing you expect to see. It's a sight I'll never forget.
That's so incredible. And I think, for everyone at the Explorers Club, I think sometimes it feels like everything has already been done. Everything has already been mapped in this information age that we live in. What is there left to uncover? But that's what continues to inspire me about the expeditions I hear about in your work in particular, because there are these new places to science, and everything that you're doing is creating new information. And, it's this tiny little species of leech, but that can tell you so much. And I think in this time that we're living in of mass species extinction, understanding the biodiversity, maybe in some cases before it's lost, or finding ways to protect it is so important. I would love to hear more, Gugulethu, about what some of the environment, I loved hearing that description that Maya gave. What is the environment that you're working in like?
Now, for me, the environment that I'm working in, it's really has been manipulated by humans, and so it was really interesting for me because for me, really nature also involves the humans. They are really a part of it. So also, we wanted to involve the people, also wanted to get their indigenous knowledge, and also get the directions on what to do, what also their attitudes are towards the species of study, on what it really meant to them. And then when we're looking at the environment, we wanted to really check the landscape as it is. How we wanted to also have an understanding of the landscape, how much it has been manipulated. And yes, it was a real disappointment. There were so few natural forests, and with this misconception that we already have, that some people think developing countries, they're properly fine, there's lots of intact spaces. I think for me, it was one of the eye-openers, like, wow, things are not really as we think. And then also when we were looking at some of the natural forests, they didn't even have much, they'd been tempered a lot with, they didn't even have much diversity in terms of the plants. So they were not as much different from some of the fields and ecosystems that they were having, which also meant that the species that we were looking for were really affected. So yes, the environment was highly manipulated, and I know it's sometimes exciting when people want maybe just natural areas, but it was so important for us because that's where we wanted to start when we were talking about conservation. We wanted to start at that level because we knew that it will affect also the other conservation areas that we have that are pristine, that are close. Because the area, it is surrounded by national parks, it is surrounded by some heritage sites. So we wanted to make sure that that place, when we understand what is happening and how we can conserve it, it will also have a positive impact to the areas around.
I think that's wonderful. And I think especially, how do we work when, as explorers, as scientists, how do we work with local communities? How do we travel through these areas? How do we understand, as a community member in some cases? Maya, I'm curious what your experience has been working with communities in Madagascar.
Yeah, I think it's an extremely rewarding process working in Madagascar because there's actually a system in place that requires international researchers to employ and collaborate with local Malagasy graduate students and guides. And through this system, I know a lot of my colleagues have formed lifelong relationships with certain guides, and they return to the field year after year to carry on these huge projects. So not only does the system foster stewardship and collaboration, it really helps amplify the voices of the Malagasy scientists that are out there that don't necessarily get the same opportunities as other international scientists might.
I think that's so important, and I think that in the past, scientists and researchers, going back, it hasn't always been the case of collaborating with local communities, and I think that both of you are such wonderful examples of explorers in the 21st century, and how not only do they involve local collaborators but empower them and work together towards common goals. I would love to hear, Gugulethu, about you're working with this, working with bees and what, pollinators mean for ecosystems, and, an insect that can bite you and for, a bigger population sometimes might be, wonder if you get stung a lot in the process of doing your research and sort of the messaging that you do around what you do and why bees are important.
It has been such an amazing actual experience dealing with bees. It's very true that when we started, there was so much fear, and everyone, when you ask for a research permit or you want to start the work, the very first question is the stings, the dangers associated with it. But later on, you get to realize that the dangers actually, they are very slim. Actually, it's interesting that with all my work, I haven't been stung, actually. I mean, it's amazing. I have never been. I had one interesting experience though. We passed by some hives and they came in such huge numbers. And we were running away, and it was very interesting because people would be expecting maybe some kind of, maybe we had some tricks and things like that, which we don't really have with bees. But yeah, I think one of the things that we realize, the fear of bees is too high. It's way higher than actually the danger that they really have. And with really working with bees, one other thing that we realize is the important role that they play in the ecosystem. We realized it was so amazing to realize first the level of specialization that they can have, that some species, if they get eliminated, there are specific plants that will be in such a big, we will have such a big trouble. And then also to just come to realize that most of our wild plants and most of our crops, actually, they are dependent on bees for pollination. It shows us how dependent our future generation, as well as us right now, we are on bees. Though there is obviously, people are mainly maybe worried about big species, but the important role that the small species are playing, it really makes us realize how important it is for us to explore, to go out and to learn more about the species, and also just realize the number of species of bees. It's amazing. There are so many in the world. There are more than 20,000 species. And also, when we went out in the field, we couldn't even get to species level. We end up at the genus level, because also the challenges with the expertise and the number of species that we were handling. So it was so amazing. And also the challenge that comes with when we have so many species, we now need to understand how each and every species, its ecology, so that we're able to conserve it. So it really shows how much there is so much to learn, and we need more of people to go out and explore and learn, so that we can conserve these amazing species that serve our wild environment, as well as our food security.
I know it's a scary thought, but can you imagine a world without bees, or could you picture that for a broader audience of people who, the research that you do? And I know that there are some global challenges that bee populations face. What would a world without bees look like?
Wow, I think it is going to be a real disaster. I know people now have come up with some technologies to try and replace them, but what we have realized is that the technologies, number one, they're very expensive, and secondly, they are not as good as the bees. So they will be the production will be really reduced. And also, in some countries may not be able to get this technology. So, which means, actually, I think for some species, more like 3/4 of our crops will have a challenge with reproduction for 3/4 of our crops, and a huge percentage of our wild ecosystems. So that means generally, when you look at nature, we will have tree diversity will be reduced, number one. Number two, even the species, the small other insects and big animals that depend on those species will be then affected. So, and also us and those other species with the high trophic levels will be affected. So generally, our nature environment, the way it looks like, it is going to be changed drastically. And then also the food that we get, most of our fruits that we get from the that are pollinated will be greatly affected. Of course, we have some fruits that don't depend, like bananas, but we also have some important fruits that depend on pollination. They will be greatly affected, and we really, really need to conserve these bees for food security and also for biodiversity.
That's such a good point, and I think it relates to the larger theme of this talk series about nature. And we have all these technological solutions, but in a way, nature does do it best, and we can't ignore that, the sophistication of these ecosystems. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I would love to go over to Mai and learn a little bit more about, because we talked about the reputation of bees, and you also work with a species that doesn't have the most sparkling reputation, and what that is like.
Leeches sort of have this fascinating role in pop culture where they've been featured a whole bunch of times in different ways, and they're typically, kind of weird and kind of spooky, and people have like this gross fascination with them, sort of. So at least I find that when I bring up my own research, that's always sort of the reaction that I'm met with is, society's mainstream reaction to blood-sucking worms, which is fine because it creates a really fun segue. And I think people are genuinely curious to learn about leeches. I think they're largely misrepresented. And so it just, I'm able to sort of use their reputation to my advantage and sort of, inform people of something they hadn't known before.
And can leeches, I sort of, I've done field work in a few places with leeches, and I did wonder, like, are they ever dangerous at all? Like, can they hurt you?
No. There aren't any, they aren't known to be vectors of any human diseases. So in that sense, you're fine. And we're way too big to be like exsanguinated by a few leeches. Which is something that little frogs and tiny mammals have to worry about. So we're okay. We're fine. I
would love to hear you mentioning little frogs and little mammals. What is some of the biodiversity? What was your expedition like? Because I remember hearing you talking about what the days were collecting these leeches in the rainforest fragment.
Every time we went into the forest, we came across something new and exciting, and usually new to science as well. So it's just, through a scientific lens, there's just so much waiting to be discovered. There's so much potential out there, and it's really stimulating, actually, being in the field as a scientist. You sort of see nature happening in front of you, and you're constantly thinking up of like new hypotheses to test and ways to come back and future studies to conduct. And it's just a really inspiring space to be in general.
It's wonderful to hear. I share that too, miss field work. What would be a typical day in your field site?
Usually we get up with the sun around 5:30, 6 o'clock. We have breakfast at camp, which is usually rice and some eggs. And then for me, the biggest challenge is actually being able to process all of my leeches within daylight. So there are so many leeches in this fragment that I was in, which is a really good sign because they're actually indicators of forest health. So forests with intact canopies retain a lot of moisture in the understory, and that provides really hospitable habitat for leeches. So where there are leeches, there's good intact forest. So it's a good problem to have, but I just collect 100, 200, 300 a day, and then I would be racing to finish processing my samples before the sun went down. I basically go out around 9 a.m., collect until lunchtime, which is 12 or 1, and then from 1 to 6 is all I have to separate all of my leeches into morpho species to the best of my ability, and drop them in different tubes and get everything labeled and organized. So my days were quite busy, actually.
And out of the vertebrate species that you were able to work with and observe, what are some of your favorite ones?
I think it's hard not to give lemurs credit. They are just so charismatic and charming to watch. But I also really love the ring-tailed mongoose that hangs out around camp and eats our kitchen scraps. And I've been lucky to hear a fusa chase in the evening from my tent one night, which was kind of scary, but really cool.
What's that? Sorry.
Yeah, so they are Madagascar's largest carnivores. I believe they're about the size of like a German Shepherd. They're not that big. They primarily hunt lemurs, and they chase them through the trees. And I heard a proper chase one night from my tent.
German Shepherd's not that small.
I know.
It's not some of the megafauna that they have in Zimbabwe, of course, but I think that, it could probably take a good bite out of you.
They're not interested, but it probably could.
Yeah, Gugulethu, I would love to hear your, what a typical day out in the field is like for you.
We will camp actually at the people's homes, so we will be staying at the rural areas. There are nice smart huts, they're cool inside. In the morning we'll be up around 5 because 7 o'clock we'll be starting to sample the first bees, and then we sample in the morning at 7, and then we will sample for an hour, and then we wait 12 o'clock, we do our second sampling, and then we do our last sampling around 4. That was our last sampling. And then in between those sessions, we normally would use them to characterize the vegetation nature, the trees, the number of flowers, the ground cover, just doing vegetation assessments. And then in the evening, we will be pinning the insects into the bees into the different boards and labeling them to say morning session, which site specifically, giving them the locations, the GPS position. And then we put them nicely because they are very delicate. So you want to break them for later identification. So we normally have our lunches around, so it's breakfast in the morning around 5, and then lunch around 1, 2, and then dinner around 8, 9. And it was mainly snack because it's in the field. Then you then have something warm in the evening.
And how do you do the collection of the bees exactly?
The bees, we normally use the sweep nets. They're conical, yeah. We normally would use the sweep nets where you hold the sweep net, and then when we have demarcated our place, let's say it's a 50 by 50 meter plot, and then we stand at least 10, we have our 5 transects of 10 meters away, and then you move in the transect, you'll be sweeping with spears. Until you get to the end of the transect, or you'll be stopping maybe at 1 meter to check, and then you collect into your nice bottle, and then you cover and you finish. And when you finish your transect, you might want to label, and then you do the rest for the other transect. And then of course there's some situations whereby you may not be able to capture some. If we realize this one is a unique situation, we've got a lot of bees, we also try to just record that they are also this is the situation, because sometimes you may not be able to catch them. And then there's some that are very high up in the trees if you're able to go up. But if then it's a whole colony, you just record. You don't try to take the whole colony.
I'm always so impressed with the academics who can also do this crazy physical demanding work, because hearing it's impressive. Maya, I would love to hear about a bit of your backstory, your relationship to, nature as a whole, and how it relates to you as an individual as well as a scientist out in the field.
Yeah, I mean, for me, nature has always been, for as long as I can remember, a place of comfort, and a place where I can go to sort of realign myself. And I almost feel like I feel most myself when I'm in nature. I've had so many wonderful opportunities to be able to travel, and some of my fondest memories are just like exploring my family's garden in Egypt, just crawling on my hands and knees and catching grasshoppers and collecting hermit crabs from the sea, and just really immersing myself. And I would go off for hours and no one would know where I was, and I'd come back with like snails all over my body. And that's usually where you could find me. So I really, it's part of my identity, I feel, really.
That's so wonderful. I envision the little Mai covered in snails. Gugulethu, what same question to you.
I think for me, nature has always been this beautiful, serene environment, quite peaceful, no troubles. It's just so beautiful. To me, it symbolizes beauty, symbolizes peace, wholesomeness. So all the time when I think of a place to also relax, a place to, just get away from your challenges and troubles, I would say nature is the best place to be. So when I was young, I would always want to go to my real home and experience the natural environment, the natural woodlots, just to be there, enjoy the natural food, that the indigenous vegetation, the indigenous herbs and things like that. That's how I've always enjoyed nature. And though when I grew up now, I realized the scientific part also coming in with the realization of how things have changed right now. Because when I go back to my real home, which is one place that I used to enjoy nature, things have so much changed. It's so difficult to see some of those beautiful places. So now, to me, there is also an important aspect that comes with exploration and trying to understand nature. To me, now nature is a place to be understood so that we can conserve it for ourselves. It is also a key for the sustainability of the future generation.
It's really beautifully put, Gugulethu. I appreciate that, and I think that's a great way to define it in exploration. I would love to hear your take on your experience in nature, your research. What has it taught you about the natural world that you think could be an insight for people?
There really is such a delicate balance in nature that has to be maintained, and every little creature, every individual species, every member of a population has a role to play, and I think that just can't be overemphasized. Yeah, I think that's a major takeaway that I've gotten from my research.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone who works in field research is humbled by the natural world, by the complexity of it, and that is always a great reminder. And I love learning about new fields of research, about both of your fieldwork environments. I mean, even just thinking about the continent of Africa, how massive it is, how diverse it is. My hearing about your childhood in Egypt so far north and how different that must be from Madagascar, and sort of, and crisscrossing this so many different environments in so many places that we don't fully understand. And, I would love to hear what has your experience been traveling in different places on the continent and working in the field research in different areas.
I've spent countless summers in Egypt with my family, and those experiences are really different from the field experiences I have in Madagascar. I sort of fell in love with Madagascar, and I haven't really gotten a chance to go elsewhere. There's just so much to see, so much to do. And traveling, I guess, with my background offers me insight into what it's like to be a visitor in other people's spaces, because an Egyptian native, I sort of see what it's like to receive outsiders in my home country. And so just being mindful of that when I myself am a visitor, doing my best to be receptive and respectful.
I think that's so important. And I think that helps also redefine what it means to be an explorer, and what it takes to be an explorer as well, the sensitivities, the understanding. So I think I really appreciate that. And from both of you, I would love to learn about sort of what's next in your research. What are you excited about going forward? I know there's so much that has been put on hold, postponed, paused, but you've been doing so much in terms of, I know both of you have been publishing and working on, towards finishing pieces and, planning future expeditions that will happen, I'm sure, one day. But I would love to hear about some of those projects. What are the questions you're looking at? What are you hoping to investigate further?
Right now, my next area of interest will be protected areas. We think we have tried to really understand what is happening with bees in agro ecosystems. Now we want to understand in protected areas, which mainly the national parks. And I really would love to inventory, because we do not really have inventories of bees. That's as I have highlighted, sometimes when you're dealing with small insects, they have always been a fascination for big herbivores. People may know what is the herbivores or the carnivores in a certain park, but do people know the bees that are in our parks? So I really want to also inventory the bee species that are in our national parks, and also relate them to the different vegetation that is found in those national parks, and also the climate, and hoping to start this as a baseline survey that will also be used to monitor bee populations, especially in the face of climate change.
Wonderful. Excited for that work. And like I said, it will happen. And Mai, would love to hear about your future investigations and what the state of your wonderful forest fragment is.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to find out either. Right now I'm sitting on a few hundred samples that I'm eagerly awaiting to analyze. And soon, hopefully, we'll find out exactly what lives in this mysterious forest fragment, and it'll give us a good measure of the diversity there and hopefully make a really good case for protecting it. So that's what I'm up to as I'm wrapping up my dissertation. And in the future, I would really love to explore sort of how biodiversity responds to human conflict. And I just think it would be fascinating to explore that.
Yeah, and I know that you've done in your past, you've done other research as well on was it soil health and because your research, what you have studied, crosses a lot of different fields. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
In my undergrad, I was part of an ecotoxicology lab, and so we were focused on assessing how sort of a mainstream pesticide influences the soil ecosystem. And so we were looking at earthworms and how they responded to pesticide application, and it actually made them a lot more fragile and susceptible to death. It made them really stressed out. And so, without earthworms in the soil, you pretty much don't have soil, which is a problem. So I think I am and I always have been really interested in how humans interact with wildlife and wild spaces. And I think that is going to be a thread that continues throughout the rest of my career.
I'm just really struck how both of your research just seems so relevant, so connected to not only, things that are part and parcel to our survival, like, agriculture and, soil health, but also, biodiversity. And I think sometimes it seems like the research can be in these tiny little academic niches that doesn't really go beyond, but I'm just really impressed how both of yours, for various reasons, really connects. And I would love to hear what it's like working in teams with larger goals that have a big societal impact, as well as your smaller scientific goals.
I find really working in big teams, or maybe what I can say collaboration, really helpful. And it really helps in achieving more in a very short space of time. I really learned it later though, especially for the bees, that it would be really great if you can have someone looking at the genetics, and then you have someone looking at the diseases, and then you have someone in ecology and someone in social sciences looking at perceptions and attitudes, which means basically in a very short space of time, or just that one season of data collection, you have managed to unravel a lot of information in a short space of time. So when you are working in your own small niches, it takes longer and it's a waste of resources. I think that's really one thing that I learned.
Yeah, the multidisciplinary aspect is really interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Gugulethu nailed it. I think collaboration is the future of science, and that's sort of, I think, where all research is headed. Drawing on other people's backgrounds can be also a really great source of inspiration and just a really good way to inspire creativity and new ways to perceive the same problems. And that's something I've really enjoyed out of working in a team. As far as broader societal impact, I think I'm really interested in messaging and really trying to get out of, like the scientific sphere and the scientific community. Because sometimes, it can feel like an echo chamber, and we're all agreeing here. No one is saying otherwise. Everyone agrees that it's important to conserve biodiversity. But I really think more broadly, the brutality of nature has often been showcased, and not so much the tenderness and the detail and the intricacies and the complexities of it. And I am always so excited to talk about my work and talk about nature in this way in groups that aren't familiar with any sort of science or research backgrounds. So that's something I value a lot, is the opportunity to get to speak to groups without scientific backgrounds.
Yeah, it makes me think of I've heard you describe a few times leeches and how they can be quite delicate and even elegant. And seeing photos that Kim took, who came along with you, and it was I love to see you interacting with the species that doesn't always perceived that way, but I was able to get a little peek into that. And I don't think many people would think like a leech could be sort of elegant or beautiful, but and I know you've done some work with schools as well in the sphere of education. And what has that been like?
Again, it's really rewarding. I think especially being able to engage with younger generations is critical. And I think getting across that, first of all, that research is an option. People can pursue this as a career. People can decide to go to grad school and travel the world and protect wild spaces. And I think just encouraging curiosity in general also is, one of the best parts of engaging with children and schools in general, and showing them that, a woman can do it and trying to be a role model in that way.
Yeah, I would love to hear your take on that as well, Gugulethu.
I have managed to communicate to, of course, the farming community. I even managed, of course, to communicate with the school kids, though I find it very important and I would love to really do it. I realized that it is normally a challenge with scientists, that most of our information is in publications that are not accessible to the people who are the ones involved in nature and who are the ones who have to be involved in the conservation. So the aspect of outreach is very important, and I have normally done that through involving extension workers, though also through research I realized it's not a very useful tool. And recently I realized social media is very effective. So I have also started working with some people in marketing to do some videos, some small adverts, and some pictures, animations that people really engage and can quickly catch the message. With amongst all the information that is in right now. So yeah, that's how outreach or information dissemination has been like to me.
Yeah, how do you think that this pandemic connects to biodiversity loss in your research?
Yeah, I think now more than ever, as we experience life in this pandemic, I think we're finally beginning to grasp the consequences of biodiversity loss through habitat destruction. And I think unless we put concerted effort into conserving wild spaces and keeping our biodiversity intact, variation of species alive, we can expect to see more and more events like this, more spillover events, and more situations that allow for the contact of people with potentially infected hosts. And so, biodiversity loss is a major driver of this, but so is climate change, and habitats are lost through climate change as well. So in my research, monitoring biodiversity, keeping track of it is a really useful tool, especially in our time, to be able to establish baseline measures for the future.
That's really fascinating. Gugulethu, what in terms of relevant things to your research, what has this pandemic brought out? What insights have you had during this time?
I think this pandemic has also showed us the dangers that also come with wildlife trafficking. That is no longer only an issue of biodiversity loss, but also a health challenge. And also, I think it is also important for people to understand that even if this pandemic is being connected to wildlife or to biodiversity, still these species, they play a very big role in our lives. And the last thing or the last solution could be destroying them. Sure, we need to work together. We need more exploration to understand how we can live with the species and minimize this human-wildlife conflict, because we depend on the species.
I think it's so important, and I think especially, it's tough. In the US, we have rampant conspiracy theories about where this pandemic came from, and I feel like now more than ever, science empiricism is almost it is a public service to be out there collecting data, collecting facts in this moment that we live in, where even science seems to be under threat, the whole method and how we understand the world around us. So I appreciate both of your work so much, and the way that it connects to the larger challenges that we face. It is fascinating, though. I will say that what you started to talk about, I didn't know that, and I would love to learn more.
Yeah, I was at a conference this week, and they talked a lot about this, where basically, like, as you reduce diversity, the animals that remain are usually generalists and those that can survive without any sort of particular habitat or food source. And as they become more abundant, they're sort of also more likely to contract diseases. And in being more abundant, they're also more likely to come in contact with people. So it's kind of this feedback loop that happens when you reduce the variation in the wild.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. It's the same problem with monocropping in agriculture. And why diseases would spread and why diversity is so important.
I think more like when you disrupt the food chain, so you realize that some other species that have to be dealing with some of these diseases or some, however, if they reduce or they become extinct, that means we have a big challenge.
Fascinating topic. Of balance in nature, and our whole idea of the human narrative around balance, that, of course there is no, we kind of have this positive view of all of these things that are held in place. But I just feel like when you upset the balance that we have been able to live in, that there's more crises, there's more massive swings. And yes, the quote unquote nature will always sort of upright itself over the long term. The whole idea of us, damaging the planet or destroying the planet is, constructed under our human idea of what nature is. But at the end of the day, it's going to affect the millions of people, billions of people that live on this planet, and the fragile ecosystems that have enabled life by some miracle.
And like you're saying, in the end, nature will go on. It'll be fine. It'll recover as it always does. But really, we're killing ourselves. We're not. We're making it hard for our species to survive.
Very true. Also, it also comes to the realization of the importance also of these small species that are not charismatic. That, yeah, people might want to aggravate to the charismatic big things that might want to take all the glory, but these big things are being supported by the small species that we cannot see. So we need to make also that balance in our exploration.
Exactly.
I love that. And I love that what I was thinking about both of your research is that when you look at small things as well, it's slowing down. And I feel like so much of our society, so much of, our cities and everything is about growth and just everything's sped up, but stopping to look, and not just to look carefully, but to look closely. I think both of your research almost has this larger metaphorical significance.
It's very true. I think right now the world is in this hurry mode, and I think really it's also with exploration, when you go into the field, it's already a sort of type of slowing down to understand things. And I need to understand these small things again, another level of slowing down. And it's also amazing. Sometimes people really think that species, there are so many of them. But I think it is also important that we realize the level of specialization that they have, just like human beings. We may not really be eating everything. There's some things that we eat. So you realize also with some of those species that they are giving services to specific organisms or specific areas, that they have some specific roles that they play. And if that one organism has been destroyed, you have to understand that it's a role that has been destroyed. A number of organisms also that has been affected, and also the lifestyle for us that has been affected.
That was wonderful. So I would like to just really thank both Maya and Gugulethu for taking the time, for talking with us, for sharing their experiences, their insights, their research, their lives of field work and expeditions that are so important as we've learned. And thank you as well to Fjällräven, for the Explorers Club, for hosting this, and for continuing to support our grant programs that puts explorers, amazing explorers just like these, out into the field.
What experience in nature set me on my course? It was pigeons. Having to do a story for National Geographic magazine and assisting photographer Charlie Hamilton James really sparked everything for me. And it really changed my train of thought and how I approached not only pigeons, but all animals after that. He gave me an interesting topic. He called and said, "Hey, you're from Brooklyn. I would love for you to help me on this story. I think it's a really cool opportunity, and I'd love to work with you, but our topic is pigeons. Research it. I want to go to the coops. I want to go to the stores. I want to meet the enthusiasts. I want to see New York pigeons. That's your job. That's your assignment. I'm going to have my company send you a contract, and the minute you sign that, you're on the clock." And I had to go and research your subject now. Growing up in New York City, I never appreciated, interacted with it in a good way. In doing the research, I learned that pigeons are some of the smartest birds in New York City. They're survivors. They know how to get by. Pigeons are very monogamous. They mate for life. And also on top of it, pigeons are a great bioindicator in urban environments. I was born in South America. I was raised in Brooklyn.
I would say that when I was traveling through Africa, I was able to meet some of the most hospitable and kind human beings I've ever met before. It really gave me a different perspective of what it is like to be on the complete opposite spectrum of what we're used to here in the Western culture, which is we want to accumulate material things. To me, I saw something completely different. I saw a community throughout Eastern Africa that believed in the Ubuntu philosophy. The true meaning of Ubuntu means I am because we are. Within the communities, they're all sharing amongst each other. They would not just leave each other laying on the streets, homeless or in pain. And, those are some of the findings that I thought was quite fascinating. So I always came to the conclusion that Africans had understood the way of life in terms of living and caring for each other. We had found the way of material progress, but we had lost the way in humanity.